Hey everyone, welcome to this special evening edition of #Malkin Live. It's been a little while since I live streamed last, and I've got a really important guest that I'm going to get to in just a second. A couple of housekeeping items. Tune in on Newsmax Saturday, 7 p.m. for a new edition of Sovereign Nation. I've also got a new column out at uns.com on Maxine Waters, my longtime nemesis, who I've covered since I was at the Los Angeles Daily News in the early 1990s. She has been one of the most toxic racial insurrectionists in this country, and I give a refresher course on everything that I have reported on her for 25, nearly 30 years now. Of course, she is just richly leading the charge now against President Trump. One of the impeachment big mouths. And let's see what else. And as I've been urging you to do, of course, I've stopped using Twitter since I was locked out the day before the inauguration. And you can find me on my preferred platform at telegram.com. So much happening in the news. If any of you are, of course, familiar with this live stream, which is still posted on YouTube and Facebook, and as you can tell, I'm vamping here to let people come in from those two platforms. Hi, everybody. Make sure that you ask me any questions and comments, and my guest as well. But one of the big themes that I have hammered now over the last year, especially, but over the course of the last 10, 15 years, really, is the idea that parents should be empowered as the frontline protectors of their children's health. And over the last year, we've had many folks talk to us and shed light and give truth on the situation with lockdowns, the state of science and junk science in the age of COVID. We've had James Todaro come on and talk about the Lancet study that was discredited, hydroxychloroquine and his role in all of that. Alex Berenson, the former New York Times reporter, Del Bigtree, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Heckin Lively, and Judy Mikovits, and Charlene Bollinger, a number of great truth tellers. And one of my most valuable sources for information is Dr. Simone Gold of America's Frontline Doctors. I'm going to bring her in right now. Good evening, Dr. Gold. Thank you so much for joining us here on Malkin Live.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm thrilled, and we have so much to get to. I want to just jump right in because you are just a font of information, and I'm going to bring up I'm going to share this on the screen and see if you can see it as well. I had done a series called COVIDgate, the corruption of the clinical trials of the COVID vaccines over the last couple of months. And one of the things that I called attention to, that I wanted my readers to really dig into was, let me bring this up. Where did it go? Here it is. This was back in December, and I had noticed an application, I think it was to the European Medical Association or whatever the big European medical agency there is that approves vaccines, an application to suspend that process by Michael Yeadon and a couple of other people. And in particular, they were warning about the potential fertility-specific risks involving antibodies against what they call spike proteins that could disrupt development of placenta. And it was, quote, unclear what, if any, warnings the vaccine makers were giving, I think, both the participants in the trial and then obviously people who are partaking in the vaccine. And this has been an issue now because there is a push to vaccinate women who are pregnant. And this is something that you've been calling attention to as well. And I'm going to bring up your tweet on this and then give you the floor Let me see if I can find that. I don't have a producer, so it's all me. Here is your tweet from, was this yesterday? A couple of days ago. And I'm not going to pronounce this word. I want you to. And fill us in.
So first of all, it's so important that we reclaim the language. These are not vaccines. These are experimental vaccines. People sometimes think I'm making a political point. I'm not. This is exactly their status. They are investigational agents only. They will not be authorized as full vaccines until 2022 or so, which is a couple of years away. This is critical because I don't understand how physicians in good conscience are rushing headlong into recommending an experimental anything for anybody. If you want to enroll yourself in a medical trial, by all means, feel free to do so. In my experience as an emergency physician, almost nobody chooses to do that. But if you want to, that's fine. The problem is that it cannot be mandated or cannot be given willy-nilly to millions or tens of millions of people while it's still in an experimental trial. Currently, Pfizer, Moderna, and all of the others are in investigational stages only. This is very concerning. I'm glad you referenced Dr. Michael Yeadon. He protested to the European Union version of the FDA. That's called the EMA, European Medical Agency or Medicine Agency. And he put together a written protest that the vaccines are still too experimental to be rolling out to the masses. I think that was mid-December. Mm-hmm. He was overruled, and they continue to roll them out. His concerns were 4 different things. One was the antibody-dependent enhancement, which we have to talk about. Mm-hmm. But the second, which you're raising right now, is the fertility aspect. And I just want to stress to everybody that, I'm a mom, and when you're a mom and you're a woman who wants to get pregnant, the desire to get pregnant is overwhelming and it's enormous. And that's really, it's not something that can be replaced by something else. And it's not something you can mess around with. The cascade of events that has to go on in the human body to get pregnant and to maintain a pregnancy throughout is incredibly complicated. And that's why historically doctors and scientists have always excluded pregnant women from clinical trials because we don't know all the details of what we don't know. And in this case, also pregnant women and breastfeeding women and women that want to get pregnant are excluded from trials. It has been shocking, therefore, to see people advocating that pregnant women or young women that want to become pregnant should ever be in favor of taking an experimental anything. May I remind everybody, there are women out there that don't want to eat, 6 ounces of salmon because it might have a little bit of mercury in it.
Right.
But they're willing to throw all this caution to the wind and say, jab me with something experimental. So what I tweeted about a couple of days ago is a young female physician who's been very pro the experimental vaccine. And in fact, she went ahead and got the vaccine, the experimental COVID vaccine. And she's 2nd trimester pregnant. And a few days later, she loses the pregnancy. I feel it's critical to talk about this, and it's why I wanted to come on your show specifically to talk about it. A couple of things. One is losing a pregnancy in in the 2nd trimester is not very common. The typical reason you do is because the placenta has some kind of failure. Well, if this thing is really going wrong with the experimental vaccine, it causes placental failure. We know that from case studies of women who've had COVID-19 while they're pregnant. There's a case studies written in our white paper on the experimental vaccine. A woman came into the ER because she's like 5 months pregnant, and I'm paraphrasing, she had COVID. She was sick, but not sick enough to stay. A couple of days later, they bring her back to the ER. She ends up being hospitalized, and she ends up losing the pregnancy. And they autopsied everything, and they studied everything. It turned out the only problem was that the syncytial trophoblast layer of the placenta was very, very inflamed, and the placenta failed. They didn't even see the virus in it, right? So it was just this maybe an autoimmune response to the virus, et cetera, but she loses the pregnancy. Now, we see that with prior coronavirus vaccines. We've seen that with Middle East respiratory syndrome viruses. So we know that this mechanism exists to attack the syncytial trophoblast layer of the placenta. The concern with the experimental COVID vaccine is that it may mimic kind of a permanent COVID status. So you're taking a situation that would be time limited. You have COVID-19, you're pregnant, you lose the pregnancy, that's sad. But what would be much worse than that is if you forevermore cannot maintain a pregnancy because you've gotten a vaccine. So instead of just the one-time episode of the illness, you instead have a lifelong episode of infertility. Now, am I saying this will definitely happen? I'm not saying that will definitely happen. I'm saying that bench scientists who are working on this very issue have raised this red flag. They said it could happen. We have seen it with prior similar viruses and vaccines. Therefore, we need to pause, take a breath, remember that this is an experimental medication only, and treat it with the due deference we treat experimental medications.
So you're saying that there are documented cases, or there are case studies, or there's peer-reviewed literature on this phenomenon of, and I'll just use lay language, but the impact on placental development, that we've seen that with pregnant women who have taken the MERS vaccine or who have had MERS.
If I misspoke, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. Right. We saw it, at least one case report in a COVID patient who was 5 months pregnant, and we've seen it a lot with the patients who've had MERS, not the vaccine, MERS.
Got it. And that may have been my misunderstanding. But the reason I'm asking is I just want to make it clear to people who are following along here, especially those who are not scientifically minded. And there are a lot of moms who are trying to educate themselves, and especially women who are of childbearing age. They see the PR push for pregnant women to get this vaccine. There's a lot of there's a lot of sort of almost not shaming, but there's sort of this like moral element that they need to protect their unborn child and get the vaccine, when in fact they are likely endangering unborn life. Is that safe to say?
I if that's the feeling out there, I don't know what to say. Remember, up until last year, pregnant women didn't even want to put a Tylenol in their mouth, right? Just because you're being sold something by somebody doesn't mean it's a good thing. You have to be very cautious if you're pregnant, and as a young female, you've got eggs and fertility and a uterus, and it's all very complicated. It's all very delicate. You must treat it with tremendous respect. I feel as though we're not treating this area with enough respect. It's lunacy to get this experimental vaccine if you're a young female. It's that simple. It's lunatic. I would flat out forbid any young female from getting this vaccine. And I think it's very unethical for any physician to offer this to a young female. Again, I don't want to be misunderstood. I've been fully vaccinated all my career. My children have been vaccinated. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not having any more children myself. However, young women, people under age 50, with no treatment at all, have a 99.98% chance of surviving this SARS-CoV-2 if they don't get any treatment at all. And if they have hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, which has now been started to be, approved, they have essentially zero risk of this thing. And we have an unknown on the other side with the delicate situation of fertility and pregnancy. It's a no-brainer.
Did you ever get a response from this doctor who had tweeted that you informed anything?
No, and honestly, my request to her is sincere. I want to share publicly. I did not know these issues a few months ago. I don't think most doctors know these issues. I never really thought about it. I just went ahead and got my vaccines, and that was that. But this rush to do something experimental is what's bothering me. And I wish she would call me or DM me. I will definitely respond.
I think that's really important. The need to attach the proper adjective to this vaccine, experimental vaccine. I'm going to start doing that as well. The conditioning that we get from the pharmaceutical industry about their products, when they keep repeating time and time again, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, it has this sense of finality to it, when, as you've emphasized, these are products that are still in the investigational stage. And I think one thing, and this is a failing of the mainstream media and the profession that I've been a part of for nearly 30 years now, is when the FDA issued its quote unquote approval, that is a conditional emergency use authorization. And it's supposed to be conditioned on the completion of the trials. So I think it's easy to blame the media, and there are many good science journalists, but on the other hand, you're dealing with industries that rely on a lot of pharmaceutical ad revenue,
right,
to line their pockets.
So I am in an emergency position, but I'm also a Stanford University educated attorney. And what you're bringing up is really what gets me passionate. It is written clearly that this is an experimental agent. It's written in the law. The FDA application, they're currently called investigational status only, and investigational is defined as experimental. So legally, they are in an experimental status. That has legal implications downstream in terms of ability to sue and compensation and all of that. In addition, it's very clear by long history of Nuremberg Code, Helsinki Declaration, and by federal code of regulations that you can never pressure or coerce or duress, those are the words in the statute, anybody to take an experimental agent. We've known this since the Nazi era. I can't believe truly that we're having a conversation about any kind of mandates for experimental anything, because it's clearly against the law, it's against humanity, and this is well established all across the world for decades. So again, you're right to reclaim the language. We're not talking about a vaccine. This is not the measles vaccine. This is not the flu vaccine. This is an experimental investigational agent at this time. We might have a different conversation in 2 years from now. But, I'm not going to give the media as much of a pass, because there are things I'm going to say that people have never heard. They haven't heard this word syncytial trophoblast, that there can be inflammation of the placenta. You know what else we haven't heard? We haven't heard that the VAERS, VAERS, which is a vaccine adverse events reporting system, which is how doctors and patients are supposed to report any adverse events. Have you heard, maybe I'm sharing this with you the first time. There's been about 500 deaths that are in time temporarily related to getting the COVID experimental vaccine. Nobody is saying they're definitely from the vaccine, but this is the best that scientists can do in terms of kind of getting an early warning system. So this VAERS system exists where people can call or make a complaint. Oh, I think this was related to that. So we've had it for years and years. So for comparison's sake, for influenza, there have been about 20 VAERS deaths reported since September. There have been about 130, I think, or 150 influenza vaccines in that time. There have been almost 500 VAERS associated deaths with the experimental COVID vaccines, over about 30 million vaccinations. That puts the COVID-19 experimental vaccine at an 80 times rate of influenza.
Wow.
And it's not written in any mainstream media. Am I saying that's definitely the cause? I'm saying it's worth looking at.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And accessing the VAERS database has been rather difficult over the last couple of months. The system apparently has gone down. People have, I think Alex Barrison was talking about the difficulties, and in fact, some VAERS entries that are supposed to be accessible on the internet have been removed mysteriously as well. Of course, a lot of people who've been, I guess the term is vaccine hesitant or vaccine questioning, particularly with regard to mandatory vaccines, have been aware of this database. They know about the compensation program. They're very aware of the special liability immunity that Big Pharma has when it comes to the manufacturing of vaccines in general. But because people don't have this information about these deaths, which again, we're saying that we can't know for sure, but there does seem to be some suggestion of a relationship, right? Is that fair to say? Is that safe?
Yeah, I've looked into some of the cases just very anecdotally, and they definitely sound related to me. You know, a person will have all of a sudden severe anaphylactic shock reaction. That's a very rare thing to happen.
Yes.
So you have to kind of assume it's from the vaccine. Is that proof? It's not. But when the numbers start piling up, what I don't like is that we're not even hearing about it. And I take screenshots every time I go into VAERS. It was working last night, so I got, the good numbers. But, I just don't understand why we're not really willing to talk about it. It's, it's crazy. And there's one of the really big point I wanted to make is that, for the average person, layperson, not a doctor, they're thinking, oh, I don't want to get the vaccine because, you might get sick or something. I want to distinguish between like just a side effect of something and then more of a catastrophic adverse event.
Yes.
Our America's Frontline Doctors is very, very concerned about the kind of catastrophic event. So what is this? The number one problem that we haven't answered yet for this experimental vaccine is this thing called antibody-dependent enhancement. And I apologize for using such big sciencey words.
Yep.
It's also called pathogenic priming. But I want to tell everybody, this is not fringe. This has its own Wikipedia page. We have known about this for a very long time. This antibody-dependent enhancement is a bad thing. You hear enhancement, you think it's good. It's bad. What it means is your body has an over response if it then sees the virus. So this is how it works. You take the shot, everything's fine. Or maybe you have little side effects. You take the second shot, everything's fine. What happens, the concern with antibody-dependent enhancement is then after you've been vaccinated, you get the virus in the wild, just going about your life, you get exposed, and you have a sudden, severe, catastrophic cytokine storm, you do terribly. Why are we concerned about this? Well, because prior coronavirus vaccines had exactly this problem. And prior viruses that were similar to coronavirus, like MERS, dengue, had exactly this problem. This is not like some fantasy world thing. Antibody-dependent enhancement is a real thing that we've seen in prior coronavirus vaccines. This is why there was never a prior coronavirus vaccine. Everybody, this is the 7th coronavirus. The SARS-CoV-1 15 years ago, 18 years ago, they tried to make a vaccine and it failed because of antibody-dependent enhancement. So that's why we at America's Frontline Doctors are super worried, because we're not worried so much about the side effects people get immediately, but we're very worried if half of our population is vaccinated, then all of a sudden we get exposed in the wild and people start dropping like flies. We're not going to know about that until that happens. And that could be 2 years from now, 5 years from now. This is our big concern.
Absolutely. And this should be a concept that the mainstream media is covering. I pulled up a tweet that I did back in December when I did my series on the clinical trials, and pointed out, and others have pointed out, that it used to be that your public health industrial complex spokespeople warned about the risks from ADE. And I included a screenshot here from the Pfizer protocol regarding this phenomenon of antibody development enhancement, which occurred as a result of RSV and dengue vaccination. Yes. As well. And then, as you mentioned here on this chart, it mentions feline coronavirus. So like you said, this is not some fringe thing. It's mainstream. Tons of articles. If you just look at PubMed or any repository of peer-reviewed medical journals, and if you talk about it, you may well be accused of engaging in, quote, conspiracy theories and be targeted by big tech and silenced or deplatformed from social media. That's what happens.
One of the problems in America is that we don't pay enough attention to what goes on across the world. So dengue fever is one of the biggest killers of children. I think it's East Asia. I forget.
India and the Philippines.
Right. Okay. And it's one of I think it's the #1 killer of young kids there. So there's been a huge incentive to get a vaccine to dengue fever for 50 years. So they finally rolled one out. I think it was around 2016 or so. I believe the country of Singapore, I might be wrong, refused to use it. And then the Philippines did use it. There were so many deaths in children from this exact mechanism of antibody-dependent enhancement that it not only was it, of course, pulled off the market, but people actually went to jail. Yes. As a crime.
Yes.
And we simply are unaware of that here in America, but it was only 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, the more you try to get the truth out about this, the more targeted you are. And I had warned a couple of years ago, I did a series back in 2019 when big tech really coordinated with the World Health Organization to turn dissidents or truth tellers or whistleblowers on these issues into public enemy #1. And I mean, I guess they were the canary in the coal mine because, we've had this much bigger purge writ large on right-thinking people over the last couple of years. But it seems to have started with people who brought out this type of information, whether it was on the dengue vaccine or people who had questions about the health effects of Gardasil, or who challenged mandatory Gardasil vaccination regimes. here and around the rest of the world. And that's why America's Frontline Doctors is important. You've got an independent platform. Tell us more about the website and what you have on there now.
Thank you. So, like I said initially, I'm a board certified emergency physician. I was working on the front lines, and I was seeing patients who had COVID, and I was being told both by my direct doctor administrative supervisor and by the governor of the state that I couldn't prescribe a cheap, widely available medicine that I knew worked. I knew it worked because I treated patients with it, and I knew it worked because I'd read all the science. Of course, that drug was hydroxychloroquine. I kept using it, and I was told I would be fired, and it was very unpleasant. So I started looking for other doctor allies, and of course we found them online. And then we coalesced and we formed America's Frontline Doctors, and we exist really solely to bring the truth out. We are volunteer, we take donations, of course, but in exchange we really help people. We put out the truth that's been censored. I'm actually stunned. I knew censorship was a problem in our country for at least 10 or 12 years now, 15 years maybe, but I'm stunned at the degree of censorship and the rapidity of it. It's shocking to me that we can fool people into thinking a drug that's the most commonly used drug in India, for example, hydroxychloroquine. It's been used for decades. Derived from quinine, which is found in tree barks. George Washington gave it. That we can manage to convince most of the world that this thing is unsafe is actually shocking to me. So whatever, we came forward and we have lots of educational content on our site. Also, the number one question we were asked is, how do I get my hands on hydroxychloroquine? Because it can save my life. Right. So right thinking people know this. So we made that possible. We partnered with a telemedicine company, and you can go to our site and you can consult with them. It's a third-party service, and you can obtain hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. I'm not here to sell hydroxychloroquine. It's anything that works. It just so happens that those are the two that work. But I encourage people to have this medicine in their medicine cabinet because, first of all, it works if you take it early or prophylactically. It can be very difficult to get from your own doctor. And people get very scared when they hear they have SARS-CoV-2, right? So they sort of get panicked. And if you knew you had this safe drug in your medicine cabinet, you wouldn't be nervous. So that was really the impetus for starting americasfrontlinedoctors.com, is just to kind of bring truth to the American people. We do a lot of public speaking. We have position papers. We did the first one on hydroxychloroquine. We have the position paper on the experimental vaccines. And if I can just mention, we are working on an initiative now to push back on policymakers and decision makers that want to mandate these experimental vaccines.
Yes.
So people go to stopmedicaldiscrimination.org, stopmedicaldiscrimination.org. Please sign the petition. Doesn't cost you a dime, but this empowers us to go to policymakers really on your behalf and explain that the American people or people worldwide don't want this. So stopmedicaldiscrimination.org. I can guarantee you we will be negotiating or discussing with policymakers, businesses, airlines, etc.
Wow. And I just pulled up the website now, and you've got almost 500,000 signatures on this petition. It's so important because the juggernaut is in full force here. And the thing is that, of course, you have government at all levels, local, state, and federal, where there are incentives to pass these types of mandates. But there's also a sort of a de facto mandate that takes place when you have major industries now considering the idea of requiring these types of vaccinations to engage in all sorts of everyday behavior and everyday life activities like traveling, for example.
Right. So we at America's Frontline Doctors feel that the bigger threat at the moment is really from private industry and not from the government. Not that the government's not a problem, they are, but private industry, specifically airlines. We saw how quickly they changed your life and made you wear a mask. Oh, God forbid they're going to make us wear 2 masks.
2 or 5.
If they, by the way, I was asked if I could comment on that. I said, at what point do I get to stop responding seriously? I mean, really, like I can't give a serious response to that. But we plan to negotiate with the airlines directly because, first of all, obviously airlines don't want to be in the business of healthcare and privacy and mandating all this stuff. They're just kind of stampeding towards it because there's all this public pressure. So everyone who's listening, you must sign this petition and you must share it, because the more people we can show don't want this, the better the business leaders will listen to us. If I'm talking with American or United or Delta CEOs, and there's 1 million people who've signed, perhaps they'll think twice in addition to all the policy reasons.
Absolutely. And I know for the last couple of months, I've just heard from so many of my readers and people on social media who follow me and viewers and whatnot. What can I do? What can I do? They're feeling helpless. Well, all you have to do is click on the petition. You don't have to go out. You don't have to go out on the streets. Sign the petition. Stop medical discrimination. And is it stopmedicaldiscrimination.org?
Org.
.org, right. And can people access this through the America Frontline
Yes.
Doctors.com?
So we made it, you go to americasfrontlinedoctors.com and it's right there on the front page. In exchange, also you can read, we have a 35-page position paper on the experimental vaccines. It's not boring. It's pretty interesting stuff. But sign and share. Again, like you, a lot of people contact me. What can I do? You must do this. Everyone thinks I'm just one person. What can I do? This is what you can do. Please sign and share.
Absolutely. And just one last point on the hydroxychloroquine. Of course, I know lots of people in comments noticing finally that now it's acknowledged by the establishment powers that be in science that hydroxychloroquine is safe and it's effective. And it's interesting that it only happened now after so many brave whistleblowers in the medical community had gotten ostracized, risk their careers and their jobs to say so.
Yes, it's, you know what, I honestly, I don't expect it, but this really needs to be like almost like a Nazi war crime tribunal. This has been such a crime against humanity. It's breathtaking in its scope.
Yeah. You mentioned the Nuremberg Code, and of course, post-Nuremberg, the idea of informed consent was enshrined. It's supposed to be a basic principle of bioethics and medical ethics. And because there's such poor reporting in the mainstream media, because there's this collusion between many of these scientific agencies, governmental agencies, and big tech, how is it that anyone can possibly be call themselves truly informed when there is such suppression of the kinds of facts that you bring to light every day with America Frontline Doctors?
You are right to emphasize the important aspect of informed consent. So in the Nuremberg Code, when you look at it, I looked at it just last night, there's 10 rules, and these Nuremberg rules became the basis for medical ethics all across the world. Declaration of Helsinki, and as I mentioned, the Code of Federal Regulations, our federal statutes, and really virtually all of our states have taken those rules. The first one, the longest one, the wordiest one, the one they take the most trouble to explain, is all about informed consent. And you have to say, why do they talk so much about informed consent? And the reason is because it's so easy for scientists or physicians to mislead or lead a person into any direction. Even if you're a very bright person, it's very easy to not know what you don't know, to obfuscate, to fool, to mislead. So it's very, very clear. You're not allowed to do coercion, duress. You're not allowed to force, but you also must fully inform. Now, how do we know people are not being fully informed? Very simple. I don't even think the doctor who took the experimental vaccine who was pregnant, I don't even think she knows it was an experimental status only. I've had so many conversations with people that don't even realize it's in an investigational status. So how is that informed consent? They don't write it anywhere. I had to search it. I had to find the paperwork to show that it's an investigational status. So that's the beginning and end of the discussion. This is not informed consent. You don't even know it's investigational. And very important that investigational meds can never be coerced by federal law.
Right, right. You mentioned how pregnant women or just people in general are very particular about the additives and ingredients of the foods they consume. And of course, one of the things that Michael Yeadon also brought up, and I guess I can't remember, was it Dr. Wodarg? I can't remember the co-petitioner, right?
Yes.
Was they singled out two additives, and I wonder if you had looked into this as well. And I mentioned it briefly, but one of them was called PEG, which stands for polyethylene glycol.
Yes.
And the other one was M-neon green. What do you know about these?
I'm not as solid an expert on that, but the first one, the PEG, can cause severe allergic reactions. So he was very concerned about that. But I'm not your best expert on that. I agree with him, because it's not that hard to agree. We don't know enough. We know that PEG has been a problem in prior vaccines. So he's making that case that it hasn't been fully studied because it's experimental. Yeah.
Right, right. But along the lines of truly informed consent, you know,
Yes.
it's worth it to ask these types of questions, and all of the red flags that they raised in that petition are really important. You'd think, yeah, right? You'd think
No. Listen, guests, I'm an expert on the subject, and I don't even know all the components of those two things. We're obviously not getting informed consent because I have to search and I have to research to find the answers to these things. So I don't spend as equal time. I spend equal time, you know, in the things I think are most important. So I'm not even informed on these subjects as I should be.
Yeah.
There's the proof.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Right. Proof of concept right here. I'm going to ask a question, and, you know, because you've got this very unique perspective and set of skills as both a doctor and a lawyer, this is a question I get over and over and over. And I've had this question posed to me over the last 30 years as a journalist, and it's important as a doctor, as a lawyer, as a citizen, as a parent. How do you know what's true? I mean, I know we're getting into epistemology here.
Yeah.
How do you know what's true? How do you trust what you see on the internet? What do you do to vet? What's your process?
It's almost like you just knew that was my most favorite question.
Is it? For you.
May I tell you? Because I'm in this, I'm do what I do because I want to teach people how to recognize propaganda in real time. So I wrote a little book a few months ago. It's called I Do Not Consent, My Fight Against Medical Cancel Culture. The purpose in writing the book is not for my ego. The purpose is I teach you in that book how to recognize propaganda in real time. And I give you a little bit of an acronym. One of the ways you know propaganda in real time is, well, let me back up for a second. We live in a time when you can no longer just trust what people say. There's ultimately only two sources of information. There's like the actual science itself, like you have to actually go down, be a scientist, read it, learn it, know it, or in any subject, or you really know and trust a person who tells you something. That's it. Those are the only two reliable sources of information. We're very confused because we have Facebook and Twitter and social media and your friends and your cousin, they're all telling you something. Don Lemon says something or Mark Zuckerberg says something that's equal to what a board certified ER doctor says. So it's very, very difficult to put the noise out. But understand at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you to decide. And the only two sources are if you actually know the content yourself or you know somebody that you trust, that you personally vetted. Now, a little trick that you can use, and I say this in the book, is what did the science or the data information say prior to the controversy, right? What did the data in scientific journals say about hydroxychloroquine prior to 2020? What did the data in the scientific journals say about masks prior to 2020? That P is an acronym in my PDQ, and I give the acronym how to decide. But consider the information that existed prior to the controversy. One of the ways I recognized that we were living through a lie was not because I'm a physician, which is what people think is why I recognize it. It's because I said to my physician peers, how could you say it's not safe? It's been around for 65 years. It's been studied up the wazoo. It's been given billions of times in massive doses for years to old people and immune compromised people and to babies and to pregnant women. How can you say it's not safe? So when somebody came back to me and said, oh, well, I have this safety concern, I knew that wasn't true because of all the evidence prior to the controversy. So that's one way you know. What was the evidence prior to the controversy?
That's fantastic. And how about, what do you tell lay citizens and your sort of lay following about trusting medical journals? And I had referenced Lancet. Could you give a sort of a thumbnail sketch of that controversy? And I'd covered it previously, but if you can go over that again. They used to be the gold standard, right? Peer-reviewed medical journals used to be the gold standard, but it seems like everything else, that a lot of political science has infested the pages of those journals as well.
So I'm going to speak of what I directly know. Up until last year, I didn't pay that much attention to this stuff. What I directly know is I've directly read journal articles that are complete garbage. This has shocked me. This has almost like shaken me to my core. Last year, you know about the Lancet article. You may not know there was another fraudulent article published in JAMA that was never retracted.
Huh.
And this article, the lead author is Borba, B-O-R-B-A. It was published late April, and it concluded that chloroquine was not effective against SARS. When you read the article, however, you discovered that they cherry-picked the patients. They put the older, sicker patients in one group. That was problem one. Problem two, they didn't have the biomedical ethics oversight that you required with human subjects. They just didn't have it.
Wow.
And number three, they gave that older, sicker group 2.5 times the lethal dose of chloroquine. The lethal dose, 2.5 times of anything will kill you, of the lethal dose of anything. My problem with this is not even that they did such shoddy science, which they did. It's that they managed to get it published in one of the most famous medical journals in the world. And that's what amplified the message and put a megaphone around it. We tried very hard to get them to retract it. JAMA refused to retract it. This is just one study that I know of directly, in addition to Lancetgate and all those other things. So it's been eye-opening to me that scientists have drunk the Kool-Aid. So when you look into it more deeply, it turns out that pharmaceutical, medical journals, really the only advertisers in them are pharmaceutical companies. Right. The only other exception, you might have like a MasterCard ad in there, but 98% of their revenue is coming from pharmaceuticals. So they must bow. So you may have seen the video of the former French health minister, Dr. Blouze, I think was his name. Right. But you can catch it in French and it's subtitled, where he says he was at a meeting, or he was witness to a meeting where the head of the Lancet and the head of New England Journal of Medicine admitted that they have to do what the pharmaceutical companies say. There's a video of it on YouTube right now. So I would say that it's very difficult to know what to believe if you're a layperson, and you should not throw out your own common sense in favor of an expert. That's not to say the expert may not be right. They may be right, but you should not automatically assume the expert is correct. You must find a source that you trust and believe. You must look for their motives. In America's Frontline Doctors case, we're volunteers. We're not paid by the government. We're not paid by the pharmaceuticals. We're really not paid at all. People can donate. Right. So yeah. It's difficult.
Yeah. I always advise people to follow the money to find the truth. And of course, it doesn't always tell you the full truth, but it does often give you a good sense of the kind of financial incentives that you should consider when you're assessing the veracity of claims and information. And then,
if I could just add though, Michelle, I think one of the things that's really gone wrong in 2020, and maybe even a decade or two before that, do not forget that you have the capacity to think. Everyone who's hearing my voice, you have the capacity to think. Just because a guy with a bunch of degrees is saying something, he may or may not be correct, and you cannot throw away your own ability to think critically about a subject. I'm very frustrated. It's not that lay people don't know enough. There were many, many physicians who got on the bandwagon of saying the safe generic drug isn't safe. Yes. How did they get that? It's not a knowledge thing. It's acceptance that there's somebody smarter than me, brighter than me, more credentialed than me. Don't do it. Think critically for yourself, and then either go to a source that you absolutely trust or become an expert on it yourself. Those are the only sources.
Yes, that's right. And, when we talk about accountability, it starts with our own selves. Absolutely. So I have a question, and we've got a lot of folks in the comment sections from both Facebook and YouTube tweeting about Dr. Stella Emanuel, asking, where's the apology to all of the doctors who stuck their necks out to tell the truth that, of course, is now being belatedly acknowledged by many of these formerly anti-HCQ outlets.
It is so frustrating. I love that tweet that she put out. Yeah. It is so frustrating that people continue to go on with the tremendous arrogance. She's right that we need apologies. We were ridiculed, called quacks, etc. But what I prefer more even than an apology is a humility in going forward. You were so quick to say this ordinary drug was a problem, but you're also and now you say, oops, sorry. You're so quick now to say this experimental new thing isn't a problem. Pull back, have some humility about what you don't know. That's what's needed.
Absolutely. We have a couple of minutes left. And of course, you are under fire and you are being targeted. There is a legal case, and I want to give you an opportunity to say as much as you want or as little as you want about what's happening and how people can help you.
Thank you. So I in general, I don't speak at particularly partisan events. I try to bring kind of a non-political, scientific kind of perspective. I talk publicly a lot, and I talk about early treatment and the fact that lockdowns don't work, things like that. I accepted an invitation to speak at the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th in the Capitol, because it's an opportunity to have addressed really about 1 million people.
Right.
And I'm very silenced on social media. So it was very natural for me to accept that. And I would continue to speak on the health freedom subjects I mentioned. So that's actually why I was in the Capitol, because people said, why was I there? I was there because I was an invited speaker. When I arrived at the location with many other people, the speakers were all canceled. That's inexplicable to this day. There was a lot of people on the side I was on. I've seen some of the videos that people have taken, but the side I was on was completely peaceful. It's the west side steps, and it was completely peaceful. It was kind of joyful. People were like back the blue and just kind of in a positive, upbeat mood. People were praying and singing. And from my perspective, it was peaceful, and I didn't see any violence until later when I saw some stuff on TV. But I was an invited guest, and all the speakers were canceled. That's physically why I was there. And beyond that, my lawyers have asked me not to speak. What I can say about the process since then is that I was paid a visit by the FBI in a Roger Stone kind of takedown moment, which is quite uncalled for. If anybody wanted to get a hold of me, they could have picked up the phone and called. I'm very easy to find. But there were literally 20 guys with guns blazing, broke down my door.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you're actually the first person I'm saying that to on air, because I love you. I think you're a fabulous journalist.
Thank you.
It was dramatic. And what I want to say is I weep for our country. If you can pull in a person like me, I'm very mainstream. I'm an American. I'm a mom. I'm a doctor and a lawyer, for God's sake. I've spent my entire career helping people. I've worked in the inner city, impoverished people, really all of my career is Black and brown people. I also don't say that too often because I'm not looking for any accolades. I'm just saying, but that's literally who I am. And I got fired from my job because I was giving people medicine that they needed. Like literally, then you can have the FBI break down your door with 20 guns, shackle you, handcuff, drag you off. I mean, it was really terrible. I'm telling you, America, this can happen to you. And that's really the message. Now, I will say that, does feel a little bit like a persecution, right? I mean, right? Okay. So there isn't any chance that I will, I know that I was nonviolent. I was there to give a speech. That's what I was there for. So there isn't going to be any possibility of anything other than me saying the truth, which is I was there as an invited guest to give a speech, and that's why I was there.
Absolutely. And you're reachable on through AmericaFrontlineDoctors.com, but you're also on Telegram, and that's where I've sort of made my new primary platform, and people can find out more about how to support you there. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. We all need to try to be independent of all social media. Thank God Telegram is much better than the others.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of, posting on there as well. But please go to AmericasFrontlineDoctors.com. The wealth of information that you'll get is amazing. And then if you sign up, we send you a newsletter maybe every week or every 2 weeks with such good, solid information. And you can also access resources like, if you need a doctor to get you hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, you'll be able to figure that out.
Super. And then we're just about to wrap up. But if you came in late for the stream, I urge you to go back. And of course, it'll be archived at my Facebook page and then also on my YouTube page at Michelle Malkin. I want you to go back to the very beginning of this conversation. It's incredibly important because if you yourself are a woman of childbearing age, if you are a pregnant mom, if you have a daughter or a granddaughter who is planning on getting pregnant, it's incredibly important that you listen to that first part of the program where we talk about things that you're not hearing in the rest of the mainstream media. And then on the white paper that's posted that you can get it once you sign up at AmericaFrontlineDoctors.com. Is that correct, Dr. Gold?
Yes, and I'm going to interrupt and support you with what you're saying. So America's Frontline Doctors, we took about 10 doctors and we worked on our position paper for about a month or so. So we worked on it for a long time. And at the end, we came up with very serious recommendations that you're not going to hear anywhere. We say that under age 50, experimental vaccines are prohibited, simply prohibited. It's twofold. One is because your risk of death is almost zero.
Right.
And there's other treatments that will work. and there's too many unknowns, including the fertility aspect. So keep that in mind. No young person under 50 really, we think, should take this experimental vaccine. We also think between ages 50 and 70, we strongly discourage. We were split as a group, but we came down on strongly discouraged, meaning there's other drugs you could take that have been around for decades that we know are safer, but at least, strongly discouraged. Over age 70, we said you could consider this. Again, we recommend that the drugs that are established are better, but at least you could consider it. I actually voted to prohibit it on all of them on the basis of it's too experimental. There's other drugs out there, and the virus is not so lethal. What I'm afraid of is even on the old people, a lot of the deaths that we're seeing are in the old frail. So I'm very, I don't know that we're doing the right thing ethically or honorably as physicians to be putting this out for anybody, but certainly if you're under age 50, this is not for you.
Everybody make sure that you sign up, make sure you're able to download the white paper, and do what you can to support Dr. Simone Gold at AmericaFrontlineDoctors.com. Thank you. The hour just flew by, and many people are in the comments saying prayers for Dr. Gold. Thank you for everything that you do, and God bless you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye.